Good morning, brothers and sisters. We're beginning a study on Psalm 30 that I'm going to call the test of prosperity. This psalm is full of contrasts. We see death and versus health, being down in a pit versus drawn up and out. We see things that are momentary, things that last for a lifetime. We see weeping and joy, night and day, mourning and dancing, sackcloth and garments of praise. And we see all these things in the midst of 6 different cries for help and mercy in this psalm that David has. And we know that he's in a desperate situation. He's celebrating that God has brought him out of it. He doesn't tell us anything about the nature of the crisis itself, some sort of sickness or injury. But he does tell us in the middle of the psalm why he went through that crisis. As he's processing his experience, he is telling us that it's because he forgot the Lord. He forgot that he was the source of all of David's prosperity. And so we're going to look at this psalm and realize that prosperity and adversity both are tests, but in counterintuitive truth, the adversity many times is a blessing, and the prosperity, what we would label a blessing, is often the harder test. Ironically, this psalm was sung at the dedication of David's palace after he finished his house. And it says that they built David a house, and so David knew that the Lord had established him as king over Israel, that he exalted his kingdom for the sake of his people. So David had learned a few lessons at this point. He learned that God was the one who established him, that it was God's kingdom, not David's, and that anything God did for David was to be passed through David to bless other people. When I first understood the term test of prosperity, it was from some really thick, dense reading of a dead guy named John Owen. He actually lived in the 1600s, and I want to read, this is from towards the end of his book, Temptation and Sin. Listen to this. Who can look to have a greater stock of inherent grace than those men had? He's talking about David or Solomon, over those who were very wealthy in Scripture. To have more experience of God and the excellency of his ways, the sweetness of his love and communion with him. But all of them fell out at one point or another when they had newly received great and stupendous mercies from the hand of God. They ought to have been strong. Those ought to have been strong obligations unto diligence and watchfulness and close obedience. Now, this kind of reminds us, like Moses reminded the people when they're heading to the promised land. When you've eaten and have your full and have built good houses to live in, when your herds and your flocks multiply and your silver and gold is multiplied and all that you have is multiplied, take care lest you forget that the Lord your God. Beware lest you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. And so we're in today cemetery to remind us how brief life is. And it was David's near-death experience that this psalm kind of records, his awareness that he had focused on his own prosperity instead of God's blessing. He had missed the point at some juncture in his life. So I wonder if we need that reminder too, how short life is. What are we putting our hope in, our trust in? What are we trying to accumulate? What are we dreaming about? What are we pursuing? Does it match up with the wisdom of what God says to store up our treasures in heaven? I will exalt you, Lord, because you have lifted me up and have not allowed my enemies to triumph over me. Lord my God, I cried out to you for help and you healed me. Lord, you brought me up out of the grave. You spared me from among those going down to the pit. Sing to the Lord, you his faithful ones, and praise his holy name, for his anger lasts only a moment, but his favor for a lifetime. Weeping may stay overnight, but there is joy in the morning. When I was secure, and I said, I will never be shaken. Lord, when you showed your favor, you made me stand like a strong mountain, but then you hid your face and I was terrified. Lord, I called to you, I sought favor from the Lord. What gain is there in my death if I go down to the pit? Will the dust praise you? Will it proclaim your truth? Lord, listen and be gracious to me. Lord, be my helper. You turned my lament into dancing and removed my sackcloth and clothed me with gladness, so that I can sing to you and not be silent. Lord my God, I will praise you forever.